So I got a call a year and a half ago from one of my buddies, and he goes, hey, you want to go on this pack trip into the Frank Church Wilderness? I was like, yeah. It's just like this awesome place I've heard about for my entire life. The river of no return. Yes. And then he says, we're going to go up and we're going to chase some cutthroats at this high mountain lake. Even better. It's getting better now. And the best part, llamas are going to take all of our stuff up there. You don't have to pack anything on your back. I'm sold. So he sends me the details, and I look at the date that we're going in. It's July 21st. It's the day of my daughter's 9th birthday. I get dejected a little bit, and I make a phone call. I'm like, man, I can't go. He's like, why? He's like, it's 'cause it's my daughter's birthday. He goes, well, maybe she can come. I was like, oh, it'll change my whole mind. And I go home, and I'm telling my daughter about this trip. Before it's even out of my mouth, she's like, yes, we're going. So yes, now the trip is back on. I am happy, she is happy, everything's good. A lot of anticipation happens. We do a lot of hiking, trying to get it ready. I'm hiking. The day comes, so we show up at the trailhead. There's these trailers with all these llamas that come out. We're hiking with 13 people. Think about all the gear for 13 people. And it's like when you go with horses, you can even bring in more because you got somebody else bringing in your stuff. It's awesome. She gets paired up with her llama. His name's Marshall. She's going to be able to lead this llama up. And so this hike, it's going to be a mile. It's going to be flat, and the next mile is going to be a little bit steeper. And then that next mile after that is the steepest part because you got to go over that ridge before you get into that high mountain lake, right? So the first mile is absolutely awesome. It's got fireweed. You got this old fire that went through, and so you got these blackened trees. She is singing. She is asking questions. I'm like, this is awesome. We're going down the creek, and then we take a left, and we start going up this hill. Now it's starting to get steeper now. Now, something I haven't told you, it's about 95 degrees out that day. It's hot. There's dust on the trail. Every time you're stepping, dust is kind of popping up a little bit. So we're about, 3/4 of the way up, and I can tell she stops talking. Now, if you know me, and you know my daughter, when we stop talking, something is wrong, right? Something was wrong. She was not in a good place. And so I asked, the leader of the trip, I'm like, so how much longer till lunch? He's like, 10 minutes. And I'm like, okay, she can make it 10 minutes. We don't need to stop now. She can make it 10 minutes. If we've ever hiked with a group in the woods, 10 minutes turns into 20, into 30, into 40 minutes, right? So by the time we stop for lunch, she is at it. She's at wit's end. She's crying. She's asking for her mom. She wants to go home. We spent so much time in the woods, and she's never asked to go home. As a father, I'm like, I have failed. I'm feeling horrible. So we sit down, and there's a creek that comes out of the lake. And it's this cold, cold creek. And I'm like, I got to cool her down. So I physically pick her up, and I dunk her into the creek. Cool her off a little bit, shake her a little bit. Never shake a baby, but you can shake your kid. But I get a little food in her, and I see this her color starts to restore to her face, and we're starting to talk a little bit. And I'm going to tell her this story. So Theodore Roosevelt, he's a very, very revered person in our family. He's a conservation icon, a hero. We talk about him a lot. I'd never told her this story before, but I decided this is the time to tell her this story. So growing up, Theodore Roosevelt had asthma. Now, back when he had asthma, there was no way for him to have an inhaler, right? The way for him to get over this disease was to really try to just be physically fit and make his lungs as strong as possible. So that's what he did. And so he ambled around all over in the Adirondacks and had an awesome time. And so I tell her this story, and I was like, he could have let this thing debilitate him, but instead he stood up and rose against that. I did the toughest thing I've ever done as a father. I walked away, right? I walked away from my young daughter. Let her sit there for a little minute to think about it, and then I come back, and I'm like, so what do you want to do? And at this point, I'm like, if she wants to go home, we're going home. It's her decision. She's like, Dad, I'm ready to go. So we put her backpack on. She goes up the trail. She's got Marshall behind him. She's literally dragging Marshall up the last steepest part. Remember, this next piece is the steepest part. She's turning 9 then. The next closest kid was 16, and everybody else was 40 and older. She crushes it up the hill. She beats half the people that were up this. So we get up to the top of this mountain lake, and she takes her clothes off, puts her swimsuit on, jumps into the lake. Well, ice out had happened 2 weeks before. It's freezing cold. Takes your breath away. She swims around for a little bit, comes out, and as she's getting out, there's a little stonefly nymph on the ground. It's kind of emerging. We eat a lot of sandflies at our house, but stonefly nymphs are absolutely disgusting, look like aliens. She picks it up, takes a big old bite, and there's a group of people watching. It's kind of gross, and it drops out of her mouth, and everybody starts laughing. She's like, oh, yeah? She picks it up and just puts it in her mouth and goes, and starts eating it. We have this awesome time on the lake. cutthroats are just amazing. There's a time when we're out in this inflatable kayak, and I've got this fishing rod behind me. It's got a little fly on it. Fish are trying to jump and grab this fly out. Every single cast she's throwing, she's either moving a fish or catching a fish. That was an amazing time. Around the campfire, we have her cake that we cooked there. I mean, it's amazing, right? So she has this time. There's a picture right before we leave. And so she has this great time, right? She finds her inner grit, right? She finds this time when the world seems that it's all against you. You got two choices, right? You can either go home, which sometimes that's a good idea. There's a storm coming in. Maybe you should get home. Or you put your shoulders back and you face that adversity, right? What she learned there is something she's going to be able to use for the rest of her life, that grit. Now, when I think about that grit, that's a very American quality, right? Stories that you've heard today have a lot of grit in them. Now, another thing that's very American is the public lands where she was able to actually experience that grit, right? There's no other place in the world is like the United States when it comes to our public lands. There's a couple countries that come close, Canada, New Zealand. The United States is different, right? These public lands that belong to all of us. Doesn't matter how much money you made last year. Doesn't matter who your parents are. Doesn't matter if you're a Democrat, Republican, independent. They belong to all of us. We're all on the same footing. There are these places where you can actually go find this grit. Now, it didn't happen by accident, right? Our forefathers, when they came to get away from the tyranny and they wanted to set up this country, it was like no taxation without representation, freedom. With the idea that public lands and public waters really hadn't been established yet, that wildlife belonged to the people. But what they did know, they were getting away from this system, the European system, where you have king's forest, right? The king's forest and the king's game. Think about Robin Hood. By penalty of death, if you were caught trespassing or taking game to feed your family. Think about that. We want to make it different, right? But we hadn't done it yet. Now, in 1842, we started to change that. 1842, there's a guy who likes getting oysters out of a river in New Jersey. Goes and takes those to the market. It's in this river, and there's a private landowner that owns both sides of the river. He's like, no, those are my oysters. Now, his claim went back to a king's grant before we became a country. That king's grant, not only he got that private land, but he got the ownership of the fish, the wildlife, and the birds that came with it. Those were his wildlife. And so there was this back and forth spat, and finally there's lawsuits that happened. This thing goes all the way to the Supreme Court. So now it's this pivotal moment in our country. What are we going to do about wildlife? Who does it belong to? Supreme Court, in all their wisdom, said that wildlife belongs to the people, not one individual. That belongs to all of us, right? So now we got the wildlife. We got the wildlife that belongs to all of us. 59 years later, Theodore Roosevelt ascends to the White House. You have someone that had spent a lifetime out in the Adirondacks, finding his solace, finding that adventure, finding that challenge. His mom and his wife died on the same day. What did he do? He went to North Dakota and he went to Montana, ambled across the prairies. He spent a lot of time in the Badlands. That's where he found his solace. When he found that solace, he decided, this shouldn't just be for me. This should be for everybody. So he started this kind of conservation legacy in motion, this idea that the public land should be open to everybody. He established the first national monument, first national wildlife refuge. Now, we put him up on Mount Rushmore, right? One of the greatest presidents ever. You think about this time, you think everybody was just applauding him that entire time, right? They weren't. There were senators from our home state of Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming. They were fighting that entire time. Why? At that point, it was timber harvest. This idea that we were just going to rape and pillage with no idea about what's going to happen in the future. Let's just get it now, make some money, right? So we're going to fall folly, just like all these other civilizations that just kind of rape and pillage our resources. But Roosevelt was like, no, we want to make sure that they're used for the best use for the most amount of people for the longest amount of time. Sustainable use. And so we started making these things called forest reserves, which were the precursor to national forests. Congress in both houses, they did not like that, and so they passed a law that was going to forbid him from doing that again. So Roosevelt, in all his wisdom, he said, all right, I'll sign that law tomorrow. But that night, he got together with Gifford Pinchot, and they got out these maps, and they looked at the United States, and they said, these are all these places. At that point, the United States owned. They said, let's make sure that these places are there forever. Designated 21 forests that night. They called them his midnight forests. The Bitterroot National Forest is one of those forests. So he starts his legacy, and then he signs the next day. He's like, okay, I won't do it again. While he was president, he put aside 240 million acres. 240 million acres that belongs to all of us. Now that has since grown to 640 million acres. We are all public landowners of that, right? And the majority of those public lands are managed for multiple use. Multiple use is a very, very tricky thing. It means something different to every single person that's out there. There's many different constituents. I would hate to be a public lands manager. You got to make sure you're trying to make people that want to harvest timber, oil and gas development, timber, hunting, fishing, huckleberry picking, morel mushrooms. They all kind of have to have like some balance there, right? It's a very hard job to do. I actually love that. That's America. Just have this conversation about compromise and listening to other people. That's what our public lands really are about. Now, an example of that would be here in the Bitterroot Valley on the Bitterroot National Forest. They did a travel management plan just recently. So a travel management plan, for those who don't know, it's a plan that comes together, try to look at all the different users and try to decide how that travel is going to go on for the next 10 or 15 years. So they do a bunch of public meetings, right? They elicit comments, and it's their job to come up with a plan from that. Try to find some compromise. Now, when you think about trying to find a place, you're going to have people that like to backpack, mountain bike, use motorbikes, snowmobile, ride bikes, horseback. If you've ever been on a horse and you meet a horse and I meet a bike coming the other way, that's just not a good thing. You want to try to separate those things in time and place, right? Really hard job. So you listen to all these people. My organization, myself, we added comments, so then we get this plan back. Now, did we get every single thing that we wanted in that plan? No. I actually think that's okay. If we got everything that we wanted over here, what happens to the people over here, right? So that idea of compromise, nobody gets exactly what they want. Nobody. And so I come out with this plan, and there's a lot of people that are like, I don't like that plan. And my first question to them is, well, were you engaged? Did you submit your own comments? 9 times out of 10, somebody likes to argue about something that they weren't ever engaged in. And that's what the case was. And to me, it's like, no. The squeaky wheel gets the grease in this country. That's the way democracy works. You have to use your voice. Well, my voice doesn't count anymore. You hear that a lot. Well, sure, your voice doesn't count anymore unless you use it. Another way to say that is that if you're not at the table, you are on the menu, right? You have to be engaged, right? Nobody wants to be on the menu. And so it's this idea that we have to stay engaged, right? And there's all these things, you hear about Theodore Roosevelt, Aldo Leopold, there's San County Almanac out there, Muir, Pinchot, Rachel Carson, all these awesome names that helped us get this conservation legacy, this public lands legacy that we have today. But there's thousands of other peoples that we don't know that were engaged in that process as well. They just happen to have big bully pulpits, and that's why we remember them. There's tons of people that gifted us what we have today. So it's up to us to kind of stay engaged in that process, right? And so, as I am a father, and my kids are getting older, they're becoming much more mobile, which is awesome to me, because that means I get to get out more. So this fall, I've got a 7-year-old son. And we stole a day on Saturday for 3 hours. We're going to go out and we're going to go do some duck hunting. It's going to be just us, and I got a young dog. She's 2 years old. We're going to go out and see if we can go jump some ducks. And so we go to this piece of public land, get out of the truck, just go. We're looking around the slough. We're kind of peeking around. They're not there. And we're peeking around this side. Oh, there they are. Down about 200 yards. So I'm like, okay, we're going to go back around this way. So we do this huge circuitous route, right? I see a tree on the other side. I'm like, that's my marker. And we go all the way around. It takes about 20 minutes. We're peeling through these yellow willows. Finally, we get to the edge of the little slough. I pop out. Well, the ducks had moved about 40 yards. They see me. They take off in flight. I make one long-distance golden BB shot, totally miss. I'm like, all right, we still got some chances. Start going to another spot on the way, see a pileated woodpecker, see an ant pile, actually find some owl pellets. You know how an owl pukes those forward? These little owl pellets and have like these little bones in them. They're so cool, especially for a kid. So we see them. We're going to the spot. Now, this other spot, I've hunted ducks here a lot. I know they're going to be there. I don't even have to look. I know they're going to be there. They're there every single time. And so we go directly at that. Again, I peek through the willows. There they are. There's 12 mallards, 6 greenheads. They get up. 0 for 3. 0 for 3. And so now I'm in front of my son, right? I'm 0 for 3. I'm just shaking my head. I'm trying to get birds for this dog. I want my son to see this dog work. It's one of my favorite things in the world is watching a dog work in the field. It's just not coming together. And so now it's time to go back to the truck. My son finds this little snail shell, carries that like it's just this trophy that he's taking home to the truck. We're about ready to the truck, and he looks over at me and goes, you know, Dad, when you shoot at ducks, aren't you supposed to hit them? And as a father, you're like, oh. But what I love about that is he got to see me fail, right? Us fathers, we get put up on these pedestals. Like, we cannot do wrong. Everything that we do is absolutely amazing, right? But he got to watch me fail and got to watch what I do in that failure, right? That first time when we just kept on going, that second time, I wasn't physically showing that I was down the dumps. I might have been a little bit in the brain, but we're going to continue to go. You got to see all that happen. So the parting things I want to leave with you is a quote from Theodore Roosevelt. My mom has made me tweak this quote a little bit. But the quote is, I admire the man and woman that take the next step, not those that theorize about the 200th, right? So us together, no matter how you want our public lands managed, you have to be engaged. We have these special places that public lands provide all these things for us. I haven't talked about the economy, $887 billion a year that's based on our public lands. Clean air and clean water, that has to mean something to everybody in this room. We have to be engaged in that. And we have to be engaged not just for those things, but to make sure that daughters have a chance to find their inner grit and that sons can see their fathers fail. So thank you so much for coming today.